Imagine a room heavy with the silence that follows a final breath. The air is thick with grief and something else, fear. Fear for the soul that has just departed, a soul burdened by a lifetime of secrets, regrets, and sins left unconfessed. In this room, the living are helpless. The church offers prayers for the future. But what about the past? What about the spiritual weight that tethers the dead to this world, preventing their peace and threatening to haunt the living? A cold body, a crust of bread, and a stranger paid a pittance to eat what the soul could not carry with it. In the shadowy hills and isolated valleys of rural Britain, such men existed. They were called sin-eaters, and they performed what might be the most cursed job in history. Welcome to the Candlelight Historian, where we uncover the forgotten lives and strange beliefs of the people history left in the shadows. Tonight, we journey back to a time of profound faith and deep-seated fear, to meet the necessary pariah of the village, the sin-eater. Chapter 1. The Necessary Pariah. Between the 17th and early 20th centuries, a peculiar folk custom persisted, not across all of Britain, but concentrated in a very specific landscape, the Welsh Marches. This borderland between England and Wales, a rugged tapestry of hills in Herefordshire and Shropshire, and valleys in counties like Monmouthshire and Cardiganshire, has always been a place of cultural blending. It was a liminal space where the influence of the state and the established church was often weaker, allowing older, stranger traditions to survive with more tenacity than elsewhere. And here, when someone died without the chance for a final confession, their family faced a terrifying prospect. They believed the soul, heavy with sin, could not find rest. It might be doomed to wander the earth as a ghost, a tormented spirit bringing misfortune to all it encountered. And so, they would send for the sin-eater. This was a person, almost always a man, hired to perform a solemn, terrifying ritual. For a meager fee, perhaps a groat or sixpence, and a simple meal, he would ritually consume the sins of the deceased, taking their spiritual burden into his own body and soul. In doing so, he offered two essential services. He ensured the dead could pass peacefully into the afterlife, and he protected the living from being haunted. He was, in the starkest terms, a spiritual scapegoat, a necessary evil. Chapter 2. The Ritual of Transference. The ritual itself was a piece of chilling theater steeped in symbolism. One traveler's account from the 19th century paints a haunting picture. Lost near nightfall in the bogs of Cardiganshire, he saw a lone cottage light. As he approached, he heard wailing inside, and soon a woman came out into the dead of night, crying a name to the top of her wild voice. When no answer came, she took the straw from her husband's deathbed and set it alight on the road, the traditional signal that a death had occurred, and a summons for the sin-eater. The sin-eater was rarely invited into the home. He was an unclean vessel, and his work was done on the boundary, on the threshold between the house and the world outside. A low stool would be brought out for him, and he would sit facing the door, waiting. After the body was brought out on its bier, the family would pass a meal over the coffin, a symbolic bridge for the sins to travel. The elements were simple, but potent. A loaf of bread, believed to be porous enough to act as a spiritual sponge, soaking up the moral failings of the deceased, and a bowl of ale or beer, the common drink of the people, to wash it down. In some parts of North Wales, it was a bowl of milk. In other accounts, wine was used, making the parallel to the Christian Eucharist even more explicit. In some regions, like Carmarthenshire, the ritual was even more intimate. A plate of salt, an ancient symbol of purity and protection from evil, would be placed on the chest of the corpse, and the bread laid upon it. The sin-eater would then take the bread, now charged with a lifetime of misdeeds, and eat it. As he ate, he would sometimes speak an incantation, a grim contract spoken into the quiet air. The words, passed down through folklore, are a chilling pledge.
I give easement and rest now to thee, dear man. Come not down the lanes or in our meadows, and for thy peace I pawn my own soul. Amen.
He would drink the ale, take his payment, and then the spell would be broken. The family, having used him for their spiritual cleansing, would often drive him away with curses, sometimes even throwing stones, desperate to banish the contamination he now carried. The wooden bowl and plate he used would be burned, lest the contagion of sin linger in their home. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Archives. For such a dramatic custom, the historical record is strangely quiet. Our knowledge comes almost entirely from the notes of a few antiquarians, educated men who observed these rural traditions with a mix of fascination and disdain. The most famous account comes from John Aubrey, writing around 1686. He described the custom in Herefordshire, recalling one practitioner he had seen on the Ross Highway as a long, lean, ugly, lamentable poor rascal. But here is a crucial detail. Aubrey's manuscript, the foundational text for this entire tradition, remained unpublished for nearly 200 years. It was finally issued by the Folklore Society in 1881, dropping like a stone into the intellectual pond of Victorian England. This rediscovery ignited a fascination with the figure who seemed to embody the primitive Gothic past the Victorians were so obsessed with. This has led to a fierce debate. If the practice was so important, why is it missing from so many other records? Prominent Welsh scholars of the 19th century, like Canon Sylvan Evans, vehemently denied ever hearing of such a custom in their native lands, despite Aubrey's claim that it was once used over all Wales. This has led some to believe that Aubrey, with his interest in Old Testament parallels, may have misinterpreted a more common funeral custom, like the giving of food to the poor in exchange for prayers. The truth is likely a tangle of both, a real, if rare, ritual that was also a label applied to a spectrum of local beliefs. Chapter 4. A Cursed Existence. To be a sin-eater was to live a life of profound paradox. You were essential, yet reviled, needed, yet untouchable. The very act that made you useful to the community also guaranteed your exclusion from it. Sin-eaters were forced to live in isolation, in hovels on the edge of the village. One was described as living in a hut made of shipwrecked wood, between sea marsh and that dim bog where few could approach by day, none dare by night. Villagers would avoid them, believing it was a terrible omen to even look a sin-eater in the eye, for fear that his curse, the weight of 100 souls' sins, could be passed on with a glance. To understand their unique status, we can compare them to another figure of folk magic from the same era, the cunning folk. Cunning men and women were also magic users, but they were generally respected members of the community, artisans, farmers, and tradespeople. They offered practical services, healing the sick, finding lost property, providing charms against witchcraft. They were seen as helpful technicians of the supernatural. The difference was in the nature of their magic. A cunning man worked to deflect or expel evil. The sin-eater's power came from internalizing it. He didn't fight the darkness, he consumed it. He became the community's living landfill for spiritual waste. And for that, he was condemned to a social death long before his physical one. Chapter 5. A Heretic's Sacrament. From the Church's perspective, sin-eating was nothing short of heresy. The power to absolve sin belonged to God alone, mediated through his ordained priests. For a layperson to perform this function for a fee was a blasphemous imitation of the holy sacraments. Folklore even claims the practice was illegal, carrying the death penalty for the practitioner and the charge of heresy for those who employed him. And yet, the archives are silent. There are no church or court records of a sin-eater ever being prosecuted. This suggests the practice existed in a grey area of quiet tolerance. Many historians believe the custom arose precisely because of the Protestant Reformation, which swept away the Catholic rituals that had comforted people for centuries. Deathbed confession, priestly absolution, and prayers for souls in purgatory. The sin-eater was the folk answer to that spiritual vacuum, and a local vicar, faced with a choice between enforcing abstract doctrine and alienating his entire parish, would often choose pragmatism. He would turn a blind eye, allowing the necessary evil to continue in the shadows, a quiet negotiation between official faith and the lived beliefs of his flock. Chapter 6. The Last Absolution. The story of the sin-eater doesn't just fade away. It ends with a remarkable final chapter in the form of a man named Richard Munslow, who died in Shropshire in 1906 and is widely known as Britain's last sin-eater. But Munslow shatters the archetype. He was not a lamentable poor rascal. He was a respected and relatively wealthy farmer who owned his own land and employed laborers. He didn't take up the role for money, but for a reason far more profound: grief. In May of 1870, Munslow and his wife Anne suffered an unimaginable tragedy. In a single week, they lost all 3 of their young children to scarlet fever, having already buried an infant son years before. It's believed that this immense loss drove him to revive the old dying custom of sin-eating. His act was one of compassion, a way to offer his grieving neighbors a comfort he so desperately needed himself, and perhaps to ensure the safe passage of his own children's souls. Richard Munslow represents a shift in the meaning of folklore itself. He wasn't just inheriting a tradition, he was consciously choosing to perform it, using its powerful symbolism to bring solace to his community. His grave, restored by local fundraising in 2010, stands today not as a monument to a cursed pariah, but to a man who tried to heal his community's sorrow by taking it upon himself. Chapter 7. Fading into folklore. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the world that had needed the sin-eater began to disappear. With the rise of a more secular age and the professionalization of death care, the old fears and the folk rituals designed to soothe them slowly faded into memory. But the sin-eater did not vanish completely. He simply walked from the lonely country lanes into the pages of books and onto our screens. Mary Webb's celebrated 1924 novel. Precious Bane, likely inspired by Richard Munslow in her native Shropshire, explored the custom's darker, more transactional side. Later, Christana Brand's short story, The Sins of the Fathers, was adapted for an episode of Rod Serling's American TV series, Night Gallery, bringing the chilling concept to a wide international audience. The historical evidence may be scant, a collection of faint whispers from the past, but the reason the sin-eater continues to haunt us is because he embodies something timeless: our deep-seated anxieties about life and death, sin and salvation, and the profound human need for rituals that promise peace to the departed and protection for the living. He is the ultimate scapegoat, a figure whose personal damnation was the price for a community's peace of mind. Thank you for sharing this journey with the Candlelight Historian into the forgotten customs of old Britain. If you found this story moving, strange, or worth remembering, please light a candle for us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Until next time, stay curious and stay in the shadows.